Things are really getting expensive out there, so more than ever, the mashed potatoes need the wallet-stretching power of Heroclix repaints for their little plastic men and their weekly fairy tale beat-em-up games. So I'm here to give you yet another installment of the meat and potatoes of this channel. Today, I'm proud to present Lizardfolk for Pennies. Stick around and see what the buzz is about. Lizard men are another staple monster in Dungeons & Dragons and practically every other fantasy setting. Heck, they even appear in some form or another in most science fiction settings. So at some point in your gaming, you're going to want to have some of those on your tabletop if you're running games in those genres. And not just one or two, because vanilla lizard folk are a mob-type enemy. They live in groups, they hunt and fight in packs, and that's a problem because the miniatures are not particularly cheap. Looking at the range of Reapers and Nolzur's Lizardfolk, they run from between $2.50 to $7 each. And I'm not even going to show you the Games Workshop stuff, but trust me, Games Workshop are never an option if cost is a consideration. Caesar's Miniatures do put out a line of lizard men, and even though I usually recommend Caesar's Miniatures for people trying to save money, they are going to be a little bit small, so they might be more suited to represent kobolds. After all, in the lore, lizard men are kind of somewhat powerful fighters, and that just doesn't come across in the Caesar's Miniatures, as they'll be looking at most of your adventuring party's belly buttons. But at only $13 and getting a box of 34 miniatures, still a good price. Caesar's is out there doing God's work. So once again, I turned to Heroclix for repainting, and today we're looking at Copperhead, and there's many different sculpts for this particular character, but there are two that really work as lizard men. This one is particularly nice, but I couldn't find it in the bulk I needed, and it tended to be more like 50 cents plus shipping, which would end up, with the shipping making it about $4 or $5 a piece. Not really what I'm looking for. So instead I went with this sculpt, which is admittedly not as good, but I got it in a lot of 35 Heroclix off of eBay, which cost a whopping total of $8, and that included shipping. So these 7 lizard men ended up being about $1 each, and the materials and time I invested in converting them really wasn't much either. Let's see what that process looks like. First things first, we've got to get them off the bases they come on. These bases aren't appropriate for D&D or really any sort of game that isn't Heroclix. They're just way too big for too tiny a model. Now in Heroclix, the bases do a lot of work, so they have moving parts and lots of numbers and stuff on them. Not the case in most other games, and certainly not in D&D, which is where I'll be using these. So I like to put them in a vise, get them nice and firm, and then I just take a little chisel, and I have a little tiny hammer that I use just to knock them off using that chisel. Works perfectly every time. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to drop them into this can of acetone. Acetone, aka nail polish remover. This is pure acetone, although I understand nail polish remover works okay too. I don't think it's quite as pure. I just throw them in there, not for very long, or the plastic will start to get soft. This is the longest I've left minis in there in some time. I just threw a whole group in and mixed them around just in the interest of trying to do this as quickly as possible. I didn't really want to spend a lot of time converting these lizard men, and spoilers, I don't. This whole process, from start to finish, maybe 3 hours. Into the acetone, when they come out, I fish them out with some tweezers, and then I just hit them with an old toothbrush. I keep these around every time I'm done brushing my teeth. I throw these toothbrushes under my sink. I use them for cleaning and for modeling and, all sorts of things. No point in wasting them. So I do try to boil them first, though. You don't want, bits of spinach in your models. Now, what I'm using here to base my models is a 2-part epoxy. It's like a JB Weld type. This is an off-brand. It's not JB Weld, but it works just as well. I have had them for a while, and there is a little bit of like an expiration. Stuff still works great. It just takes a little longer to set up. I don't show myself mixing it up here, but that's what this gray is. It comes out kind of a off-white in one tube, black in the other. You mix it up, and this stuff gets just so hard and so good. It's got a fair consistency, so it can hold light models like this in place. It's a little bit tacky. It's not super tacky, but I do like working with it a lot, and I have a ton of it, so I try to use it, especially if I'm going to use mixed materials like these metal bases and these plastic miniatures. I find that the 2-part epoxy really has a lot of power. Granted, you could use, E6000 and super glue on this as well, and I have in many other videos. In this particular instance, I'm just mixed up a batch of this, and I'm just rubbing it on their feet and then putting them onto these copper bases that I find all over the sidewalk. I've got some shields here that I've made. They are recasts of some shields I bought. I bought a little blister of shields and axes for some sort of Viking game. I can't even remember. It's back in the Blob Orc Chieftain video. I go into which one, but I thrown a box away back when, so I couldn't tell you, and I'm not going to go watch that video. But the way I've recast these is using blue stuff, which you boil up. My partner got me this for Christmas, or my birthday. I think it was my birthday. Been wanting to give it a try. And so I cast a bunch of those shields, and then every time I do mix up my 2-part epoxy and I have a little left over, I just throw it into one of these shield molds. So after every project, I end up with a couple of extra shields, which is great, instead of just wasting that extra epoxy and just letting it dry and then cure and then throwing it into the trash. I get a couple of shields out of it, which is nice. I tried using it for weapons, but in a 1-part mold like that, one side is going to be really under-detailed and makes the weapons look weird. Works fine for shields, though, as you don't really see the other side. Some of the shields here might not be. The Kite Shields are from a more prominent litigious company, so I'm not going to name who they are from. Long out-of-print shields from decades past. For the bases, I'm just going to cover them with some white PVA glue and then a dip into craft sand. I know a lot of people are like, well, it's just going to come up. The PVA won't adhere to the metal. It will if you put a nice coat of paint on the top of the sand. You make sure there isn't a lot of extra sand. You sort of brush off anything that's loose. The sand on metal bases that I've put on, it's been on there for years. Hasn't come off yet, guys, so it does seem to work pretty good. I don't thin down the PVA for this. It's just straight PVA. Craft sand on top, mash it in there pretty good, and again, a good coat, thick coat of craft paint on top will also form a bond and a seal on top of it, so it's being held in place and together with 2 different substances on top and bottom. Seems to work pretty well. But if that bugs you, you can always use a heftier paint, and again, you know, if you have more of that 2-part epoxy, that works better. Will certainly hold it firmer. Now you can see I put those shields that I've reproduced on the upper hand. I'm going to have these guys holding spears, and what these spears are is they are actually Warzone bayonets that came with the sort of Japanese faction in that game. I cannot remember the names of those factions. Warzone was sort of a knockoff of 40K. I don't want to say a knockoff, but it was just a competitor back in the day, and it's come back a few different times. I liked it quite a bit, but anyway, never seemed to really catch on. And I got a bunch of the Japanese faction very cheap, and they come with these bayonets that you can attach to their rifles, and they sort of stick out. Whatever the rules for that was, but that's just sort of a fiddly bit that I never really messed with, and I like these as sort of short spears. The glue I am using to put those in the hands is sort of an industrial adhesive I was very lucky to get my hands on. The stuff typically goes for about $10 a tube. I got it for 50 cents at a thrift store. I don't know if they knew what they had there, but it works a treat. It's super powerful, but I don't like to use a lot indoors. It will give me a headache almost immediately, and actually a sore throat if I work with it too much all at one time indoors. So it is very fumey. So just caution if you get your hands on some kind of industrial adhesive. This one was put out by Whirlpool, and I think you can use it to seal up your dishwasher. Now we're outside here. I'm just giving these guys a prime and flat black. I would rather use gray or something, but I am out of... This is my last can of primer. I need to get to the store. I went to Walmart. Didn't have any of the cheap primer there, and I just don't like spending $5 on a can of spray paint. So I got to hit the dollar store, see if I can get my hands on some more primer. I'll take any color at this point, because even this black is starting to wear out, and boy, am I not going to prime things by hand. I haven't done that in years. Not a good time. Working on bones or something, I guess you can get away with it then. And here, just painting like you'd think I would. I'm using P3 for the greens. I've got a series of greens they sold in a set. Kind of range in dark to light, and so I just start with the darker one. work up to the lighter one, and then I add a little yellow. But there's not a ton of layers going in here, guys. I have 7 lizard men, and I really want to just turn them out, slap some paint on them. It's not a great sculpt. It's not... The guy I started with looks like, you know, one of the muscles from back in the day, that little toy line. He looks a little bit like a wrestler. Obviously, there's a human face in the mouth of the lizard, which I'm going to paint just as sort of a fleshy mouth. You know, some lizards, their mouths puff out when they spit poison or whatever. Trying to hide that as well. Just going with red and pink over that face. Series of greens. Series of browns and lighter browns on the shield, on the base. Nothing too crazy here. But I do think they come out pretty nicely, all said and done. And what's nice about doing 7 like this is there isn't a ton of waiting. I've managed to just sort of cycle through one process of painting right to the next to the next. So working on the bases was the first thing I did. I just hit everybody in brown. By the time I finished painting that 7th base on that 7th lizard man, the first one was dry, and I just grabbed the green paint, started working on the base coats for his skin. And the same thing, went all the way through. I think I did their flesh, their shields, and the very last thing was getting the details around the face and bringing in some shadow with a little bit of black lining, picking out the teeth with some white and the eyes. And very, very last thing was putting a little bit of metal on the spear. Overall, a very painless painting process. Not super neat and tiny. I think if you look at some of the shorts, when I finished up with this, there's a little bit of green here and there. There's a little bit of brown from the shield that gets onto some shoulders and stuff. But these are messy miniatures. They're swamp dwellers. They've probably got moss on things. They've got mud on different spots of them. It doesn't really look that bad. And again, it's about how much time do I want to invest in these 25-cent guys? Not a ton. If I can give 3 hours and $1.50 and end up with a mob of lizard men that look pretty good, yeah, I'm happy. I think that's a good use of my hobby time. I enjoy painting. I enjoy putting these together. So as far as like the investing the time, I wouldn't be doing anything else constructive. I like working on my paint skills. I like working on my model skills. So, you know, for me, that's not an investment. That is sort of the payoff. What did they look like? How did they turn out? I think they turned out pretty great. Let's take a look at some of those miniatures. As always, guys, you can support this channel by donating to my GoFundMe. The link for that's in the description below. I will be getting a Patreon very soon for this channel. Stay tuned for that. If you're excited for that, please leave me a comment below. Just leave a comment anyway. Just say, hey, Dave. It's a great way you can help this video get some eyes on it. Helps the algorithm out. Check out my eBay store. As always, guys, thank you for watching, and please come on back.